Okay, we were in the middle of discussing the halacha of what to do when someone tries to take something from you that is not theirs. At what point do you have to, and it's not yours either, at what point are you obligated to surrender it? What I'd like to do today, however, is I want to temporarily skip to Seif Lamed Daled because it's in Yana Diyova. It's pertinent to what we're going to be doing on Sunday morning, which is the Pruz Bowl. And the Rav Shulchan Aruch deals with the halacha of the Pruz Bowl in Seif Lamed Daled. So, Barry, we're just going to skip to Seif Lamed Daled temporarily because it deals with the halacha of the Pruz Bowl, and I want us to be able to see it before Rosh Hashanah. So the Rav Shulchan Aruch writes as follows in Seif Lamed Daled: Shemitas kesafim bashvius noheges bizman hazeh midivrei sofrim. That Shemitah, the idea of cancellation of debts, is a halacha that only is true rabbinically. In other words, biblically, there is no cancellation of debts at the end of Shemitah. It's only a biblical law, but it's only a rabbinical law. But it applies both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. And when the rabbis saw that people, as a result of this rabbinic enactment, that debts should be canceled at the end of the Shemitah, and they saw that people were desisting from lending their friends money as we get closer to this date, at the last day of the Shemitah year, and they were violating the Torah commandment of Hishamar Lecha, then Yihiyeh Davar Im Levavecha V'Liyah Le'mar Karavashan Asa Sheva V'Gomer. The Torah says explicitly, do not allow a sinful thought to enter into your heart and say that, well, the Shemitah year is coming and I don't want to lend my friend money. But rather, the Torah says you must open up your fist and be generous when people ask you for a loan. So here's the dilemma in a nutshell. Really, the whole law of cancellation of debts that the Torah says takes place only takes place at the time in temple times when the Yovel applies. When Yovel no longer applies, then the law of Shmitas Ksafim no longer applies. So even though Shmitas Karkos, even though the agricultural aspect of Shemitah applies today, and arguably, according to some, it may even be biblical, although according to most poskim, it's only rabbinical. But certainly, cancellation of debts is a rabbinical law. So if cancellation of debts is a rabbinical law, and as a result of this rabbinical enactment, to remind us of what we did when Shemitah was extant biblically, people are violating a mitzvah deoraisa, people are violating a biblical commandment, then it turns out that the rabbinic enactment has actually done a disservice to the Jewish people. The rabbinic enactment that says debts are canceled causes Jews to violate a deoraisa commandment of you shall lend people money generously. So if that's the case, how do you solve that problem? The rabbis didn't want their enactment to cause people to be oiver on a mitzvah deoraisa. So they basically instituted amdu v'tiknu Pruz Bowl. So they instituted the Pruz Bowl mechanism, dahainu sheyimsar hamalva es chova lebeistin. And essentially what that means, that everyone who is a creditor submits all collectibles to the Beis Din, and basically says, Beis Din, I remove my hand from being responsible for collecting this debt, and I instead assign you as the responsible party to collect the debt. Afal pi she'eno moser lahem shtaro, even though you're not giving them the promissory note, You're not giving them the notes, so they don't really have full jurisdiction to collect the debt since they don't have the promissory notes. Ela she'omar lahem lifnei hashmita, but you say to the rabbis before Shemitah. Now that's actually problematic because it's not before Shemitah, it's before the end of Shemitah is what really needs to be qualified. So maybe we'll deal with that momentarily. Hareini moser lachem chovi sha'agavenu. I hereby submit to you my debt that I plan to collect, kol zman she'ertzeh, anytime that I wish. In other words, I acknowledge that it's your debt based in it. You're the responsible party to collect the debt, but I will, because I've given it over to you, I have now a right to collect that debt, which is a bit strange. In other words, it's almost like a sort of like an act that we're doing. In other words, I'm still going to be the creditor. I'm still going to collect the debt. I'm still going to benefit from the money, but based in by my declaration that you're really in charge, I have circumvented the problem of Shemitas Ksafim, of cancellation of debts that takes place at the end of Shemitah. So again, I want to be very, very clear. The whole institution of Shemitas Ksafim, of the cancellation of debts, is only a rabbinic enactment nowadays. The rabbis saw that through this rabbinic enactment, people were violating the Torah's commandment to be generous and lend people money, and therefore they felt they needed to institute something which would mitigate the rabbinic law of cancellation of debts. So, so when you say, just making that declaration, the rabbis made it as if you've given your promissory notes to the Beis Din, even though you haven't, even though you still hold the IOU that allows you to collect. It's as if you had given the Beis Din the promissory notes. And the reason why this mechanism works is because when a person does actually submit promissory notes to Beis Din, then Shemitah does not cancel, the conclusion of Shemitah does not cancel those debts, because it's now in the hands of Beis Din, and the reason why is Shenemar lo yigos esre'ehu, because the whole issue, the way the Torah phrases the cancellation of debts that happens at the end of Shemitah is that it says, you shall not pressure your friend. You shall not pressure your fellow. Now, if I'm not pressuring my fellow because I'm no longer in charge of collecting the debt, so I have therefore, in effect, made this debt no longer subject to cancellation. This debt, debts, only debts where the creditor can pressure the debtor to pay are subject to cancellation. But if I submit the collection responsibilities to Beis Din and I can't pressure him anymore, so therefore Shemitah does not cancel the debt. And the debtor still has the responsibility to pay it back, but he'll have to pay it to Beis Din instead of to me. Beis Din will collect it on my behalf, and then they'll give it to me. That was the mechanism that used to work when Shmitas Ksafim, when cancellation of debts, was in biblical effect. And that's the way people would do it. They would actually take the actual promissory notes and give them to Beis Din. He says, and the reason, so therefore the reason why this is an acceptable circumvention is because since I can't pressure this fellow to pay me anymore, since I've submitted the collection to Beis Din, it's Beis Din's responsibility, no longer mine. Shekvar nimsor lahem lifnei hashmita, because they received it before the conclusion of Shemitah. Va'afilu ein lo shtar klal elachov bal peh mol pruzbal. And the final thing that the Rav Shulchan Aruch writes is that even if you don't have any promissory notes at all, but there was a verbal loan, you can still recite this formula in front of Beis Din, and it effectively prevents the cancellation of the debt. So this is the mechanism of prusbul. We are all, I hope you've been seeing my email where I talk about the prusbul, and you either have filled it out already, or you'll take care of it on Sunday morning when you do Hataras Nedarim. Even though the Rav Shulchan Aruch does not require you to fill out a form, but rather to make a verbal declaration, is already an accepted minhag to actually fill out the form and submit it to Beis Din. Okay, now I'm going to continue just because I want to go through these halachas before Sunday, so that you'll have at least a smattering of knowledge of what we're doing. Okay, so again, this Sunday morning, not only are you going to do Hataras Nedarim, the annulment of vows, which we do every year on Erev Rosh Hashanah, but you're also going to do the prusbul procedure. And the prusbul procedure basically is you're going to stand in front of your Beis Din, the Beis Din that is in charge of Hataras Nedarim, and you're going to give them a filled out form that basically designates yourself as the creditor without specifying any specific loans that people may owe you. But the form states that any loan that I have a right to collect, I hereby submit to you, O members of this ad hoc Beis Din. You will fill in the rabbis' names, or the people, not the rabbis, just the people who are doing Hataras Nedarim, and then you will give them the piece of paper. Yeah, I don't think we fax anymore, but you can scan it. You can scan it in email. Welcome to the 21st century, Izzy. Okay. But yeah. So that's, I gave you two options in the email, right? Option number one is to do it Sunday morning with a piece of paper. We'll make several copies of that. Option number two is to download the form and to designate the Beis Din comprised of myself, Rabbi Lesher, and Rabbi Torchiner, and you have to sign it. You have to sign it in the presence of two witnesses. And then you can scan it and email it to Rabbi Lesher, and he'll have a record of it.
He's a doctor. That's a doctor.
Yeah. Until very recently, my father-in-law told me that the IRS would not accept email submissions. They only accepted faxes. But, yeah. Do they require communications by fax, or so you can't email them anything? Well, I'm sure that'll change eventually. I'm sure it'll change.
Anybody that I like went 22 or anything like that, I can't think of anything here. Am I still obliged? I also.
I can't think of anything myself either. Although I think that you may owe money to somebody, and that person will want to do a prusbul. But even if you can't think of anyone who owes you money, you never know. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where somebody does owe you money, you forgot about it, and then they send you a check or they give you the money, and you feel, I'm not entitled to this. That debt was canceled. Rabbinically, the rabbis canceled that debt. What am I supposed to do now? So that's why, even if you're not aware of any outstanding debts, you should fill out a prusbul. Yeah. No, you got to fill out a prusbul. You have to basically tell the Beis Din that I'm using the mechanism of prusbul so that I can still collect debts that are owed to my business. Remember, it goes back to this whole issue of what is the business entity? What is the corporate entity? There are poskim who say that corporate entity is Ron Becker, in which case you need to do a prusbul, otherwise all those debts will be canceled. No, you just say any outstanding debts that people owe me money, I'm filling out this prusbul on behalf of myself, right? and that'll cover your business debts as well. People who owe you money to the business.
So why, I've never heard of this before, where it's thinking upon LHP, I mean, how come everybody, almost every one of us who are in business, people owe us money. So everybody should know this 100%.
Yes.
I can't believe I've gotten this far in my life.
So how come not everyone has done this, and how come it's a new thing, and how come this, right? So you have to understand, first of all, there are certain loopholes and leniencies that prior generations relied on. First of all, the fact that you see that it's only a rabbinical enactment in the first place means that the pruzbul is almost like a show. It's an act where you're standing in front of a beis din making a declaration, I submit my debts to you. Now, normally, in order to submit your debts to beis din and to authorize them to collect debts for you, you have to give them the promissory notes. We don't require that at all. We just even require just a verbal declaration. That demonstrates that this is really a method of alleviating a rabbinical law, because biblically the debts are still binding. Okay, so it's almost like there's a principle called Haim Amru Vehaim Amru. The same rabbis who said that something is usur also said that if you do a little thing like this, which is almost like just an act, you alleviate that rabbinic restriction. I'll give you an example that's much more contemporary. And with this, we'll have to stop, but I want to finish this halacha because we'll go on to the next sif. Eruv, okay? Eruv. How does putting up a string around the neighborhood allow you to violate the Nisr de'oraisa of carrying on Shabbos? So the answer is that's a fallacy. It's a misnomer. It doesn't. The prohibition of carrying is only rabbinic when you're dealing with a domain called a carmelis, which is not a biblical public domain. A biblical public domain has to fulfill certain criteria, which involves hundreds of thousands of people passing through on a daily basis. So if you have less of that kind of population, then it's a public domain rabbinically, but not biblically. And therefore, biblically, you are allowed to carry in that domain. The rabbi said it looks like a public domain. It's called a carmelis, and therefore you may not carry in that domain rabbinically. The rabbis acknowledged that there is a mechanism that you can employ to alleviate the rabbinic prohibition by putting up even a very, very flimsy kind of structure called the Tzuras HaPesach, like a series of doorways around the area, around the neighborhood, and that, in effect, allows you to alleviate the rabbinic ban on carrying. It's the same thing here. There's a rabbinic enactment that we will mimic what happened in the times when cancellation of debts were biblically in effect, and we will therefore say that all debts are canceled rabbinically. Biblically, they're still in effect. So the rabbi said, but because it's diminishing returns, because this halacha is causing people to violate the Torah and not lend people money, we will also create the mechanism of pruzbul, two rabbinic laws which cancel each other out, or the pruzbul mitigates the rabbinic cancellation. Okay? Now that we've said this, now let's take a look at what the Rav Shulchan Aruch says in the next sif. Va'achshav lo nagu pruzbul b'medinos elu. He says today, he's writing in the 18th century, our communities don't pruzbul at the end of the Shemitah year. Now, he's talking about his community. We do a pruzbul, but he's talking in his community in whatever he was in Russia, in Ukraine. He says in Eastern Europe, in the 18th century, we don't do a pruzbul. Shenasnu tam laminag lomar. And the reason for this minhag of not doing a pruzbul is shekevin shenagu came. Legavos kol chov below pruzbul acher hashvias He says, because since it has become the accepted practice that debts are still collectible after Shemitah, it's as if the person who borrowed money knowingly said, if Shemitah occurs before I pay you back, it'll be as if you've submitted the loans to Beis Din. And we'll read that text, Amir Hashem, tomorrow. We'll get to this soon. All right, have a